Well, hello, boys and girls, sports fans, and assorted waifs and strays. Guess who? It's Den here. And it is Saturday. I don't even know what date it is. Is it 21st?
21st of March.
21st of March, 2020. And we're in I'm in week one of pretty much total blooming lockdown in a village in Yorkshire where there's no bread, there's no fruit and veg. But hey, apparently the pub's doing takeout for beer this evening, so I don't know what's going to happen there. And with me today, I've got Vijay Asanka from IBM, global partner with a lot of people working for him, and he has a major financial services customer under his wing who's just come back from India. What's it like out in India at the minute, Vijay? What's happening there?
Yeah, India is looking a little weird at the moment. People are not used to the idea of being quarantined. So the Prime Minister went on TV and asked everyone to do a trial run tomorrow, Sunday, where they're asked to stay inside from early in the morning till 9 at night. He didn't call it a trial run, but I think that's what it is, because this country has never done it, right? Except maybe in wartime, many years ago, maybe 50 years ago. So India is slowly getting used to it. I just hung up with my mom, and she's hunkering down for a couple of days, not quite sure how this will evolve. So far, India hasn't had a lot of trouble, but then obviously they're not testing very much. And they're taking a lot of precautions as well, right? So the social distancing and others, I think they're doing very, very well. Probably better than we are doing here in the States, at least the one state where I grew up in Kerala. They seem to be doing it much better. The government is doing an admirable job. But I pray to God that it doesn't break in India very much, because given their densely populated nature, it would be pretty tough to contain if it breaks out in a big way.
And the healthcare system there?
So the healthcare system is kind of government sponsored. And there is obviously some private sector healthcare as well. But it's a very large country, right? 1.3, 1.4 billion people. So they will get overwhelmed very, very fast. So yeah. It's a good system, but prevention is infinitely better than cure in India. Probably true all over the world, but especially so in India.
Okay. And are you essentially locked down where you are in Arizona, or?
Yeah. So I reached back from India. I'd lost my father a few days ago. So I was in India for a while, and I came back on Monday, and then I have not left my home since then. So I'm kind of in a self-quarantine mode.
Yeah. What about your wife and daughter? Are the school shut, for instance?
The school is shut. My wife's employer has also allowed her to work from home. So we are all home, 3 humans and a dog staying home. She steps out and gets grocery and stuff. I don't. I've been staying home, given I just traveled abroad. And we're taking it one day at a time.
That's all any of us can do at this point, isn't it, Vijay?
Yeah, exactly right.
And I don't know about you, but I do know about you, but I'm old enough to remember the immediate post global war situation, and this has a very similar feel to it in many, many ways, in the sense that people are panic buying, a lot of confusion, a degree of profiteering, I have to say, which doesn't sit well with many of us. But more confusion than anything else, I think. People not sure what they should or shouldn't do, despite the fact that the government, at least our government, is attempting to make some quote-unquote recommendations and give quote-unquote advice. It's like, yeah, okay, I think I'd much prefer if you actually told us that you should do this and should not do that. But hey, that's just me. I don't know what it's not much better where you are, I don't think, is it?
No different. I don't think any of the governments were particularly prepared for this, right? They all kind of took it a little lightly to begin with, and then went full force. But it's one of those things where the government by themselves, right, cannot do very much. So the citizens have to step up and help, like flatten the curve essentially, right? To delay as much as possible the spread, and hopefully, by that time we can increase the capacity of healthcare, reduce the number of people, that will all peak at the same time. So, and that is not an easy solution for any government, right? It's not like a war, right? In a war, government can mobilize in a centralized fashion. In a pandemic, we have to do our fair share too. So it's kind of unique. So I don't think we can blame anybody. We have to figure it out as we go, and we probably should figure it out in a sustainable way, because God forbid this could happen again, right? So it's better that we learn our lessons, and we make some proactive plans on how to deal with it if God forbid it comes again.
Speaking of proactive plans, what kind of things have you been doing to help your people?
Yeah, so obviously we had pretty good business continuity plans, and a lot of people, it's I think when we pass this period and we look back, most of our clients, right, the companies that hire professional services and cloud and whatever, IT companies, they will look back and categorize their partners into two, right? People who had good BCP plans and people who didn't, because it's not every day that you have to invoke a massive global BCP plan. And we did it successfully. Everybody had laptops and remote connectivity and so on tested. So in very short order, without missing a beat, my whole team was able to go remote and still support the client without dropping the ball. And unfortunately, I do know not many companies could do that, and it's productivity loss and mass confusion and so on as a result. BCP and good operational discipline, these are considered boring things. Some consider it a waste of money, and they don't do a thorough job. And then there is a price to pay. I mean, the chance of these things happening is minuscule, but when it happens, the impact is very, very high. So I'm very pleased, very grateful actually for my team to have had such a good discipline on BCP, and we could invoke it quickly and continue our work. Now, how we sustain through this difficult period, that remains to be seen. Because at this point, it's not a technology problem or a process problem. It's more a human problem, right? Staying yourself motivated, not seeing each other every day, right? I mean, those are not easy things to live with. And we are figuring it out as we go, right? It's not easy, certainly not easy, but everybody is hunkering down, thinking that it will take a little while, and we just need to get used to this mode of working.
What about the clients themselves? I mean, have you found them to be as well prepared, or are you having to provide advice? Or
it's a spectrum, and we are clearly advising many clients on how to deal with this. Given we have a lot of experience doing this under many different circumstances. Some clients are extremely well prepared and could continue with their BCP plans with no problems. Many others couldn't. Sometimes it's things like laptops. Even if they want to give remote connectivity, maybe they don't have 5,000 laptops sitting in any one place. And companies like my employer, right, like IBM, usually can step in and solve that problem. Some others might need spare server compute capacity, right, cloud capacity, and but obviously in the industrial strength security and stuff, which overnight, if you need to turn it on, right, there are not many easy ways to do it. So they need help. And IBM and many other providers are stepping up admirably to do that. So it's a spectrum, just like with the provider side, right? On the client side also, it's a spectrum. Some people were well prepared and they spend time and energy and money on their BCP, and some didn't. And those who didn't, unfortunately, are facing some pain. And the providers are all helping what we can, but if you haven't spent that time upfront, it is tough to imagine that you can get through it without some pain. So some clients, unfortunately, will have to face a little bit of pain to get back to normal modes of working.
Speaking of normal work modes of working, the other day you wrote something of a prescient piece, I have to say, about changes that you're kind of anticipating or wondering whether changes that we're seeing in the services delivery model are going to change, and maybe for permanently or not, I don't know. But I saw everything that you wrote, and immediately I remember tweeting to you and saying, I've been bitching about all of these things for years. So, are we going to see a permanent change or not? So come on, Vijay, just talk about what you were saying there, the questions that you were asking.
Yeah, I do. I look at it this way, right? If we are fortunate and we snap out of this current problem in, let's say, a quarter, 2 quarters, something like that, I think we will go right back to how we were operating before this crisis happened, right? Because 1 or 2 quarters, everybody can find workarounds and just go right back to how things always work. But if it's going to take a longer time, which is what I think it will probably take, not happy about it, but more like a realistic view, then I think our industry needs to evolve and evolve really quickly. So I do think, and I should make that standard disclaimer that this is just how Vijay feels. It's not how IBM or any of my past employers feel. But nevertheless,
today, Vijay, that may change.
Exactly. But I do feel there's a good chance that this industry will need to evolve, not just with project delivery, but with everything about how we work, right? How we measure success, whether we travel for work, there's how we staff, how we hire, right? All those things, I think, will evolve and evolve fast.
So the travel thing in particular is interesting, isn't it? Because, the service delivery model is basically travel on a Sunday or a Monday, work Tuesday through Thursday, travel back home on a Friday, rinse and repeat however many times a year you have to do that, or something similar. And it's almost like, well, we've gotten into that habit, and why should we change? And all of a sudden it's like, actually, you ain't got a choice at the moment. So how does that work out, right?
Yeah, and it's a good time to ask the fundamental question, right? Go back to first principles and ask if, even without the crisis, was it really required to travel every week to get work done? Some of it is pure inertia, right? Because we have done it one way for a very long time. I traveled all my life, right? Many million miles in the air, hundreds, maybe thousands of hotel nights. It's not fun. We all get used to it. Those airline and hotel points come handy for vacations and stuff. So we figured out a way to make it work, but we can and should question whether this was needed for all projects. Now, clearly, FaceTime is required, and there is no substitute for that. But do we need consultants to travel every week, go sit at a client and do things that probably 80% of which could have been done remote just as well? I think that is a question that needs to be asked. And some of it is also done for pure, very mundane reasons, like there are clients who feel the only way to buy is, times, number of hours worked times a certain rate, and they cannot figure out number of hours worked if the person is not right next to them. So that is why they force people to travel. But those are all worth questioning at this point. Both for service providers as an industry as well as for clients, right? Because there is an element of inefficiency that comes with travel that needs to be seriously questioned. And I think this crisis will, at a very minimum, right, start that process, right, where CFOs and CIOs will all start asking that question, whether that was the best way to operate and can we change for the better. What
about automation? I mean, again, we've talked about this for quite some considerable time, haven't we? In the sense, how much could we automate such that the requirement for having people on site and so forth can realistically be reduced? We have talked about it for a long time. Is it is it realistic to ask that question? Can we get a good answer to that?
Yeah. So unlike travel, the question on automation had already been asked, fairly significantly deeply in recent past, right? For the last few years at least. So repetitive tasks, things that don't need a whole lot of fresh thinking. There are plenty of initiatives going on around, right? At clients that I firsthand know about, as well as what I read about. So in general, automation, that train has already been chugging away briskly. But I think it will pick up some pace, right? Because people were doing it mostly from an efficiency point of view, not a risk mitigation point of view. Now, suddenly, with the pandemic, right, human beings become the risky part of the value chain. And at least some subsection of our clients, right, will start thinking, should we even take that risk, and should we automate even more, so that some of these critical processes, it doesn't matter whether somebody comes down with a flu, they can still go ahead. So an additional dimension will come into play, I would expect. But on the same token, I would say, this pandemic also proved that not everything can be automated, right? Like supply chain is a classic example, right? Almost every supply chain expert that I know of, right? I spoke with many of them, when I was sitting by my dad in India at the hospital, right? So most nights I wouldn't get much sleep, and I was talking to folks around the world, right? People that I know. Almost all the supply chain experts that I spoke to were called in to help assess impact for their clients. And those couldn't have been easy with any kind of automation, right? That needed a lot of human intervention, human experience, past mistakes made, like a historical perspective, and so on. So automation has this twin-sided issue, right? That this pandemic episode will bring up, that what are good automatable candidates in processes, and what absolutely cannot be automated and need significant human thinking, right? Quality human thinking.
Yeah, I mean, one of our local businessmen here, he only runs a tiny little shop, but they make packaging. And he said, we're not seeing any real change in demand. At the end of the day, people still need to have things put into boxes and so forth. He said, but the real problem is, he said, what do I do with my workforce? He said, we've got a lot of stuff computerized, a lot of stuff's already automated, but you've still got to look after the machines. You've still got to take care of, maintenance. You've still got to move things around. And there are limits to what can be achieved with robots and automation and so forth. He said, I've got to have my workforce capable of doing those things, because otherwise I can't do what's required to remain in business. And I mean, that's just one very small example. I mean, I can think of many, many similar examples. The butcher across the street, he still needs to get meat delivered. Somebody's still got to handle the stuff, There are just so many aspects of our lives that at the end of the day do require humans. And sometimes I think we forget that, right?
Not sure. And it's an interesting point on the small and medium businesses, right? I think the pandemic will put the small and medium businesses under considerable stress.
Yeah.
A very simple example, right? Just from a grocery shopping experience. The small shop that, like in the US, I generally shop at the larger shops, because we don't have a lot of small shops where I live, except for a small few Indian shops, right, where we get Indian groceries. But in general, I mean, since I was in India for a few weeks now, I can see people like my mother and my aunts and so on, who have always walked up to the corner store to buy their stuff, have now started ordering online, right? Once this Corona thing came about. And I wonder and worry whether this will become a habit. Because once you're used to ordering online and the convenience of it, I think the first casualty is probably going to be the small businesses, and that wouldn't be good for the economy. It wouldn't be good for humanity. But I do have a fear that these folks might be the first to feel the economic pressure.
I have no doubt about that at all, Vijay. I mean, I moved back to the UK from the US, as you know, several years ago, and we very deliberately chose a place where everything is within a few minutes walking distance for several reasons. One is that I stopped driving quite a number of years ago, and have no intention of getting a car again. We are getting older. I mean, I'm basically of retirement age, allegedly. And so, you know, we need to be able to get to shops. We need to be able to get to the local medical center. We need to be in close proximity of a bus stop, because we do have public transport here, thank goodness. And we very deliberately made those choices, yeah?
Yeah.
All the local businesses are under strain, right? There's nothing in the shops just up the street from us. And so it's like, well, okay, can I go online now? Yeah, sure, of course you can go online. But it's going to be 2 weeks before we get a delivery, because it's come under immediate stress and pressure. And
yes.
there are clearly lessons to be learned from this. Quite
Absolutely.
what they are at the moment. Quite what they are at the moment is anybody's guess, aren't they? But just returning to what you were saying there. What about training? That was something that you mentioned, and about the old apprenticeship system in the service delivery model. It seems to have disappeared, doesn't it? What do you think happens there?
So this is probably the biggest disruption to my world, or the most fundamental difference, right? The classic consulting model had undergrads and MBAs coming into the industry, where we had long-running projects, strategy engagements, re-engineering projects, large ERP implementations, and so on, where obviously the providers will bill them at a very low rate. They start as a junior analyst, they learn the trade, eventually become a senior consultant, a manager, senior manager, and so on, right? Eventually become an expert, as a partner. That's how I grew up. That's how, most people I know grew up. But in this largely remote world staring at us, I do wonder whether this model will work very well. Actually, I don't know. It's mostly a big question I'm trying to wrestle with myself, because if it's remote and we have to bring young colleagues up to speed, especially with projects becoming smaller and shorter duration and more lean, this will put some pressure on the system. I think this will get resolved eventually, right? Because the cost economics will make it somewhat rationalized over time. Because while every client would like the most experienced people working on their projects, those are also going to be expensive folks to hire, right? So in bulk. So some kind of a pyramid would be required in every project. But for near future, if we are starting more and more projects remote, I think this classical way of recruiting and training and putting people through several projects, right, to get experience, I think that will be one of the first challenges that this industry will have to face.
Well, I think I'm right in saying that Infosys sent 10,000 students home last week that were at their one of their large campuses. And you've got to think to yourself, well, hang on a second, what are they going to do, right? How are they going to learn? And that I'm sure is going to be true for many of the Indian providers, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Given they generally operate at a larger volume offshore than other companies do here in the US. So definitely a bigger disruption for them, for sure. But I think this would be an industry-wide problem, irrespective of geography. I think everybody will have to wrestle with this problem.
Okay. I mean, obviously, you're thinking about it. Do you have any preliminary thoughts as to where this goes at the moment, or is it just too early?
It is too early, right? As I mentioned before, we are only a couple of weeks into this problem in its full force. And I do hope and pray that, we can get out of it soon enough. But, I don't think anybody is actively solving it quite yet, because there are more pressing short-term problems, getting all the customers up and running and making sure that, they can close their books and fulfill orders and so on. So there are plenty of near-term problems to be solved. But once that gets reasonably, like an 80% solved, then I'm sure, service providers and clients will all start thinking about the medium and long-term problems. and I wouldn't have thought about it either. I just had a long 30-hour, set of flights to get back from India to Phoenix. So I had some time to sit and think about it, which is why I wrote about it.
Sure. What else amongst your little list there is top of mind for you?
Say that again.
Sorry. Based on the list of things that you wrote about, what would you say is top of mind for you, other than what we've already discussed?
Yeah, I think the idea of collaboration, right, especially when everybody is remote, I think that would be one of the top of mind issues, not just for me, but everybody in similar roles in this industry. It is one thing when a lot of people work on site and a few people are remote and we collaborate. That's not the same as when everybody is collaborating from a remote setup. Just to give you a quick snippet, and I wrote about that yesterday night on LinkedIn. Most of my meetings on Friday had this very interesting aspect of how work and life integration happens in this new world. I have a young colleague, a young partner in our team who had her little baby, a most adorable little thing. He sat quietly on her lap while we were chatting. Another had a 10-year-old sitting next to him doing homework while the dad was working on a price case with me on a very, very complicated spreadsheet, so on and so forth, right? So this is different, right? So the amount of productivity, the kind of work we get to do are all going to get affected. The tooling, right? I mean, when everybody gets online quickly, now all these collaboration tools, they're all creaking, right? Whether it's WebEx or Zoom or, whatever else we use, Slack or Microsoft Teams and so on. Everything will creak at some point, right? Because nobody expected, billions of people to be online trying to do this all of a sudden. So the kind of features that we need when everybody is remote is very different from the kind of features we need when only some people are remote. So that is one, and it's a make or break point for our industry as well, right? Because if this fails, there aren't a lot of backup options, right? So the quality of internet connection and the quality of collaboration tooling, and also obviously there is a human aspect which overrides all of this, but that collaboration aspect is absolutely the top of mind issue for me, because if that fails, it's pretty tough. I can't see how this industry will be productive if the collaboration suite doesn't hold up.
Well, talking about the human elements of it, when you can do face-to-face meetings, in-person meetings, it's relatively straightforward to resolve conflict. Yeah.
Yeah.
We agree, we disagree. We can agree to disagree, move on. But when you're in a remote situation where maybe you don't have exactly the connectivity to be able to have even this type of communication, then you resort to having to write emails or letters or whatever the heck it is. How do you, in those circumstances, communicate in such a way that people don't go off the deep end, as we've seen time and time again? And particularly as it stands at the moment on social media, just to that point, I'm now actively not going on certain social media at certain times and on certain days, because it just gets too ridiculous. It's too difficult to deal with. Yeah. How do we deal with this from a business standpoint?
Yeah, it's a very complicated problem then, right? For example, in my business, right? It's largely a relationship-based business, right? Where
sure.
We build relationships over a long period of time. I have several great relationships with my clients and my peers. And once those relationships are established, the online way of interacting is not super difficult. I mean, it is still difficult. Like, for example, I could have a 4-hour negotiation with a client, might still have 1 or 2 points to resolve. And we could both decide that, hey, why don't we step out to the local Starbucks or to the local pub, right? Get a coffee or a beer and talk it through. There is no such option, right? When we are all remote. So a lot of standard procedures that we have all practiced over a long period of time. And another classic example, right? most people, by the time they become a senior manager in this industry, right, they get to be really good at presentations, right? So most of the presentation training is like 90% about how you present in person and maybe 10% about how you present online.
Right.
It is a lot tougher to convince somebody online than convincing somebody in person, because a lot of body language and phrases and so on, right, that you can use and also get immediate feedback because you're seeing the audience and their reaction. That is very different when you try to do it, on a webinar mode. So that's going to be a big challenge that we need to relearn some of these skills, and it'll be fundamentally different and quite disruptive, right? So the next generation, assuming we are shifting to largely an online way of working, I think they will have a very different set of what we currently call soft skills. I think some kind of a soft skills 2.0 will need to evolve and evolve pretty fast. And this is not just a consultant problem. This is a larger enterprise problem, right? Everybody will have to figure this out.
Yeah, I fully expect to see some pretty poor webinars over the course of the next few weeks.
Webinars are pretty boring to begin with, right? I mean, it's very, very tough even today to hold a good webinar. Now, when all training, all events, all regular meetings, stand-ups, when everything becomes online, the challenge will be significant.
So, okay, what does your week next week look like already, Vijay? Much more of this kind of stuff, what we're doing right now, or?
Yeah, so we're slowly getting back to normal functioning, as in all the scheduled meetings and scheduled client discussions and so on are happening. A lot of times is being spent working with our clients on risk mitigation and planning for alternate scenarios and so on. I would expect that to continue for a few more weeks. And then I expect maybe in a month's time, we'll be just operating in a fairly normal mode, compared to the past, just that we will all be online. But that is when all these online communication, the collaboration aspects, right, that will start to creak even more. So I hope we are adaptable and we can learn fast, right? So that we don't suffer a huge productivity loss. And then that human aspect of whether we can all stay motivated when we are all quarantined in our own homes, right? Not seeing each other, that will be a huge challenge that we are doing, simple things like we all catch a drink and get on an online platform and, see each other, crack jokes, exchange tips on how to keep our kids, continuing their education and so on. So initially the first week, 10 days, I think it's been fine. Whether we can keep up that momentum for a longer period of time remains to be seen. I'm very hopeful, right? I mean, people do adapt, especially in crisis. So I'm fairly hopeful, but it does remain to be seen what challenges will happen.
Yeah, I saw something that's kind of amusing, or at least Judith told me about something. She said a woman had come online on her local Facebook group saying, first week of homeschooling, can somebody explain to me what a split diagram is? It's like I don't know. We're all going to be faced with those kind of challenges, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I was just joking on Twitter a few days ago that if you really thought teachers are the problem, you're just going to have an awakening of your life.
Are your teachers fairly well prepared? Ours, it's very variable around here. Some of them are, some of them aren't.
So I have really no idea because my daughter's school was closed or announced that they're closed till end of the month. So her online education has not started yet. It will only start from the beginning of April. But my sister's son recently started it, and it's been a rough start. The teachers are also kind of learning on the job at this point. And the kids don't have the kind of attention span, and that's a little bit of a challenge because the attention span in class and the attention span online are two different things. And teachers are also calibrating apparently on how to deal with that. And parents are totally unprepared, right? They have no baseline. They haven't tried this before, right? So many parents are also struggling, A, to learn how to work online themselves, and B, help their kids work online. And then nobody's used to both spouses working together from home. Maybe not nobody, but I'm sure there are some folks who do it well. But vast majority of us are not used to that, right? So when physical space is limited and you have, the two spouses and a couple of kids, all, and in our case, dogs too, all trying to use the same internet connection and be in physical proximity and try to get things done. There are some challenges, and
yeah, yeah. We've told the kids, all our children, as you know, are grown up, and we say it's okay. You don't need to come round.
Yeah,
please don't come round.
This is what I tell everybody at work, and also to my clients as well, right? That for near future, don't beat yourself up on lack of perfection, right? Let's just try figuring this out as we go, right? Just be a little more kind to each other. Along the way, we'll figure out efficiency and effectiveness and so on, right? I mean, let's at least keep the ball rolling. Don't sweat over perfection quite yet. And that's what I'm going to tell my daughter as well, right? That it's fine, right? Don't beat yourself up too much, right? We are all learning this on the fly, so just be kind, be humane.
Vijay, that's a great place to call it a draw on this one, man. That's the kind of message that I'm so glad that you came up with, because I think we need a lot more of that at this moment, don't you?
Yep, I agree. Always great catching up with you, Dan. We haven't done one in a long time, and thank you for having me.
You're looking really good, by the way. You're looking younger by the bloody day. I'm just getting older, man.
That's mostly because my mom, just before I left back for the US, insisted that I cut and color my hair before I got into a plane. That's
okay, Vijay. Listen, we'll call it a draw there, man. Great talking to you. Have a fabulous weekend, eh?
All righty. Thanks, Dan. You too.
Cheers now. Bye.